I guess I just need to vent and maybe get some advice. I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'll try. So my name's Jeff, 22, and I grew up in a small town. My best friend Charlie lived next door to me since we were kids. Charlie's not your typical girl. She's more like one of the guys. Loves sports, hates makeup, you get the idea. We were super close, like siblings almost, sharing everything. We'd hang out every day after school, ride bikes, play video games, and she was always there, no matter what. Then her cousin Candy moved in with Charlie's family when we were in high school. That's when everything started to change. Candy. She's the complete opposite of Charlie. She's all about looks, always dressed up, always turning heads. I guess I got caught up in that. Charlie warned me though. She told me right from the start, Jeff, Candy's trouble. But I didn't listen. I thought Charlie was just being overprotective or jealous or something. I started dating Candy. At first, it was amazing. She was fun, exciting, and beautiful. It felt like I hit the jackpot. But as time went on, things got serious way too fast. We got sexually involved, and before I knew it, Candy told me she was pregnant. I freaked out, but I felt responsible, you know? I thought the right thing to do was marry her, especially since she was carrying my kids. Charlie wasn't happy about it. She told me again, Jeff, she's trouble. You don't know what you're getting into. But I ignored her. I married Candy, thinking I was doing the right thing, trying to be a good man, and that maybe things would work out. But they didn't. Things got bad, fast. After we got married, it all started to unravel. Candy was different. At first, I thought it was just the pregnancy making her moody, but it wasn't just that. She was unhappy with everything. The house, the fact that we didn't have enough money for her to keep living the way she wanted. And honestly, she wasn't too thrilled about being pregnant either. It's like everything she wanted from life got put on hold, and she hated it. I tried, man. I really did. I started working longer hours, trying to save up for the twins. Yep, twins. When we found out she was having 2 babies, I thought maybe things would change, maybe it would bring us closer. It didn't. She got more distant, more obsessed with getting her body back before she even gave birth. She joined some fancy gym and started going there all the time. Said it was to stay healthy for the pregnancy, but I don't know, something just felt off. Meanwhile, Charlie was still around, helping me get ready for the babies, picking up the slack where Candy wasn't. She'd come over after her nursing classes and help me set up the nursery. We'd laugh and talk like we used to, but there was always this tension, like we were avoiding the elephant in the room, Candy. Charlie never said, "I told you so," but I could feel it every time we hung out. Then the babies were born, and man, they were perfect. 2 little boys. I thought, okay, maybe now things will turn around. But instead, Candy got worse. She'd leave for hours to go to the gym or hang out with her friends, leaving me to take care of the twins alone. I didn't mind because I loved those kids more than anything, but I started wondering where she was going all the time. And then one night, Charlie came over, looking all serious. She sat me down and said, "Jeff, I think you need to get a DNA test for the twins." I laughed it off at first, but when I saw the look in her eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was right. That conversation with Charlie stuck with me, even though I didn't want it to. I kept trying to push it out of my head. I mean, I had no reason to think the twins weren't mine, right? But after that, every little thing Candy did just started adding up. She'd be out late, always vague about where she was going, and any time I tried to ask, she'd snap at me or accuse me of being paranoid. One night, I finally confronted her. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I asked her straight up, "Where are you going all the time? Are you cheating on me?" She looked at me like I'd lost my mind, like I was the one with the problem. "Jeff, seriously? You think I'm cheating on you? I'm out there busting my ass to get back in shape after having your kids, and this is how you repay me." She was so convincing, so sure of herself, I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered Charlie's words. The DNA test. So a couple of weeks later, when Candy was out again for one of her gym nights, I made the decision. I got the DNA test done behind her back. I didn't want to believe it would come back with anything, but I had to know. I had to. Waiting for those results was hell. Every day I was looking at my boys, feeling like I was the worst father in the world for even doubting them, doubting Candy. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about all the weird stuff, her lies, her distance, how things felt off right from the start. I started replaying everything in my head, wondering how I missed the signs. Then the results came in. I sat there, holding the envelope in my hands, my heart pounding like crazy. I didn't even open it right away. I just sat there for what felt like hours, staring at it, afraid of what I might find. When I finally opened the envelope, my hands were shaking. I read the first line over and over, hoping I was seeing it wrong. But there it was, plain as day, the twins weren't mine. I don't even know how to explain what I felt in that moment. It was like everything inside me just shattered. I loved those boys. I still do. But reading those words, realizing Candy had been lying to me this whole time, it felt like my whole world was crashing down. I didn't even know how to react. I just sat there, numb, staring at the results. Eventually, I had to face it. I had to confront Candy. She came home later that night, acting like everything was normal. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I waited until the kids were asleep, then I dropped the DNA test results on the table in front of her. She just stared at them for a second, and I swear I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, fear maybe, or guilt. But then she did what she always does. She flipped it around on me. "You actually went and did a DNA test? Without telling me? What kind of husband are you? You don't trust me at all." She was yelling, trying to make me feel like I was the one who did something wrong. But this time, I wasn't backing down. "I trusted you, Candy," I shot back. "I trusted you with everything. And you've been lying to me this whole time. These kids, they aren't even mine, are they?" She didn't answer right away, just crossed her arms and looked away like she was trying to figure out what to say next. That's when I knew. I knew she was guilty. Finally, she sighed and said, "Look, Jeff, it's not that simple. I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did. But you've been a great dad to them. That's what matters, right?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you kidding me, Candy? That's your excuse? It just happened." She didn't even deny it anymore. And just like that, everything changed. After Candy admitted it, I just sat there, staring at her, feeling like I didn't even know the person sitting across from me. How could she say it like that? Like it wasn't a big deal. Like it didn't just blow up my entire life? "Who's the father, Candy?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. I needed to know, even though I wasn't sure I could handle the answer. She hesitated, biting her lip, avoiding eye contact. Then she shrugged, like she was confessing to something small. "It doesn't matter, Jeff. What's important is that we're a family. You, me, and the boys. You've been their father this whole time. But it mattered to me. It mattered a lot. Tell me who he is," I demanded, my voice rising. I deserve to know the truth for once. She finally looked at me, and her expression changed. There was a hardness there I hadn't seen before. "Fine, if you really want to know. It's someone I met at the gym. We hooked up a few times before I found out I was pregnant. I didn't plan on it, but it happened. I couldn't believe it. Some random guy from the gym? The gym where she was always spending her time, leaving me at home with the kids, thinking she was just trying to get in shape? You've been cheating on me this whole time, and you just, what? Pretended they were mine?" I asked, feeling a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. Candy just shrugged again. "I didn't think you'd ever find out. And it's not like you weren't happy. You love those boys. You're a great dad to them." I was speechless. She was trying to make it seem like what she did didn't matter, like it wasn't the worst betrayal I'd ever experienced. But it did matter. It mattered more than anything. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. "I can't live like this." Candy crossed her arms, almost like she was daring me. "So what are you gonna do, Jeff? Divorce me? Leave your kids? You think that's gonna make anything better?" Her words hit me hard. She knew exactly what to say to keep me trapped. But for the first time, I realized I couldn't let her guilt me into staying. Not anymore. I stood up and walked away, leaving her sitting there at the kitchen table. I needed space. I needed to think. I walked out of the house that night without looking back. My mind was spinning, and I didn't know where to go. I just needed to get away from Candy, from the lies, from everything. I ended up at Charlie's place, like I always did when I needed to clear my head. She opened the door, took one look at me, and knew something was wrong. "What happened, Jeff?" she asked, her voice soft but worried. I couldn't even find the words at first. I just stood there, trying to hold it together, but it all came crashing down. The twins, they're not mine, I finally said, my voice breaking. Charlie's eyes widened, and for a second, she didn't say anything. Then she reached out and pulled me inside, wrapping me in a hug like she always did when things went to hell. She didn't say "I told you so," she didn't judge me. She just let me be there, falling apart in her arms. After a while we sat down, and I told her everything, about the DNA test, about Candy's confession, about the guy from the gym. The whole mess. Charlie listened quietly, and when I was done, she sighed and shook her head. "I'm so sorry, Jeff," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't deserve any of this." I looked at her, feeling the weight of everything hitting me all at once. "What do I do now, Charlie? I'm a dad to those boys. I've been there from the start. But how do I stay with Candy after everything?" Charlie hesitated, biting her lip like she was thinking about what to say. "You have to do what's right for you," she finally said. "But don't stay with Candy just because you feel trapped. You deserve better than that." Her words hit me hard because deep down, I knew she was right. I couldn't keep living this lie, pretending everything was okay. But at the same time, I loved those kids. Walking away from them felt impossible. "I can't just abandon the boys," I said, my voice cracking. "They're my world, even if they aren't mine by blood." Charlie reached out and put her hand on mine. "You're their dad, Jeff. Blood doesn't change that. But you can be their dad without staying in a toxic marriage. You have to take care of yourself, too." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in her eyes. Something I hadn't noticed before. There was something in the way Charlie looked at me that night, something I hadn't noticed before or maybe had just ignored for too long. It wasn't just the usual concern or friendship. It was deeper, more intense. I didn't know what to make of it, but it made my heart race for a second. We sat there in silence for a bit, her hand still on mine. I felt comforted by it, but also confused. Everything in my life was falling apart, and here was Charlie, the one constant through all of it. She'd been by my side since day one, through all the mess, always giving me the advice I needed, even when I didn't want to hear it. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Charlie," I said quietly, feeling the weight of it all. "You've always been there for me." She smiled, but there was something sad behind it. "I'll always be here, Jeff. You know that." And for the first time, I realized what I'd been blind to for years. Charlie wasn't just my best friend. She'd been more than that for a long time, even if we never admitted it. I could feel it in the way she looked at me, the way she always put me first, even when it hurt her. Suddenly, everything felt more complicated. There I was, sitting with Charlie, realizing I'd probably hurt her by choosing Candy all those years ago, and now my life was a disaster because I didn't listen to her. And yet, she was still here, helping me pick up the pieces. I didn't know what to say, but before I could figure it out, Charlie broke the silence. "You need to talk to Candy," she said firmly. "Figure out what you want to do next. But don't rush into anything. Take your time." I nodded, knowing she was right, but also feeling this new confusing tension between us. "I will," I said, standing up to leave. "Thanks for everything, Charlie. I don't know how I'd survive this without you." She stood up too, and as I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm gently. I turned back, and for a split second, I thought she might say something else, something important. But instead, she just gave me that sad smile again and said, "Take care of yourself, Jeff." I left her house that night with more questions than answers. About Candy, about the boys, and now, about Charlie. The next day, I went back home, and Candy was sitting on the couch like nothing had happened. I stood there, looking at her, wondering how things had gotten so broken. How had I missed everything? "I need some time," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can't keep living like this." She looked up at me, annoyed but not surprised. "What does that mean, Jeff? You're just going to walk away? Leave me and the boys?" I shook my head, trying to hold back the anger rising inside me. "No, I'm not walking away from them. But I need space. I can't stay here right now, not after everything." Candy rolled her eyes, her usual defense mechanism. "Fine, do whatever you need to do, Jeff. I'm tired of fighting anyway." And just like that, I grabbed a bag and left, not sure what the hell was going to happen next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house with her anymore. I ended up at Charlie's again. It felt like the only place I could breathe. When I showed up at Charlie's door again, she didn't seem surprised. She just opened it, like she knew I'd be back. "You left, didn't you?" she asked, her voice calm but knowing. I nodded. Yeah. I couldn't stay there anymore, not with her. Charlie stepped aside, letting me in without a word. She didn't push me to explain. She didn't ask any more questions. She just went into the kitchen and started making coffee, like it was just another normal night, like we'd done 100 times before. I sat down at her table, feeling a weird sense of comfort in the routine. Everything else in my life was chaotic, but here with Charlie, it felt stable. Safe. And I needed that more than anything right now. When she sat down across from me, handing me a mug, I looked at her and sighed. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Charlie. I'm a mess." She shook her head. "You're not a mess, Jeff. You're just dealing with a lot. More than most people could handle." I stared down at the coffee, feeling the weight of it all crashing down on me again. I don't even know who I am anymore. I thought I was this guy who had his life together. I thought I was a husband, a dad. But now, I don't know. Everything feels like a lie. Charlie leaned forward, her eyes soft. "You're still those things, Jeff. You're still a dad, whether or not those boys are biologically yours. And you're still you. Don't let what Candy did change who you are." Her words hit me deep, but I couldn't help but feel lost. But who am I without them? Without my family? I don't even know where to start. She sighed and then said something I didn't expect. "Maybe you need to figure that out on your own, Jeff. Maybe you need time to just be Jeff. Not Candy's husband, not the dad who's stuck in a mess. Just you." I looked at her, feeling a mix of gratitude and confusion. And how do I do that? Charlie gave me a small, almost shy smile. By starting over. By doing what's best for you for once, instead of what everyone else expects of you. I felt something shift inside me, like for the first time in months, maybe even years, I had permission to think about me. About what I wanted. And not just what I thought I was supposed to do. "I don't know where to begin," I admitted, feeling lost but strangely hopeful. Charlie reached out and put her hand on mine again. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight. Just take it one day at a time. You're not alone, Jeff." There it was again, that feeling. The way she was looking at me, the way her hand lingered on mine a little longer than before. I felt something stir in me, something I wasn't ready to deal with yet. But it was there. And I knew things between us were starting to change, whether I was ready for it or not. That night, I ended up sleeping on Charlie's couch. It wasn't the first time, but it felt different this time. There was something unspoken between us, and I didn't know what to do about it. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I kept thinking about everything. About Candy, the boys, my marriage falling apart. But then my thoughts would drift to Charlie. To how much she meant to me, how she had always been there, even when I was too blind to see it. I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept coming back. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. I didn't know what was going to happen with Candy, with the boys, with my life. But I knew one thing for sure, Charlie wasn't just my best friend anymore. The next morning, I woke up on Charlie's couch, feeling groggy but a little clearer in my head. The house was quiet, except for the sound of her moving around in the kitchen. It felt weirdly normal, like this was just another day, like I hadn't left my entire life behind the night before. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the weight of everything. Charlie appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and gave me that small knowing smile she always had. "Morning," she said, handing me a cup. "You sleep okay?" "Yeah, I guess," I muttered, even though I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about her, about the boys, about everything. We sat there for a bit, sipping coffee in silence. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't feel like I had to with Charlie. She was the only person who didn't expect anything from me, didn't push me to make decisions or act like everything was fine. She just let me be. "So," she started, breaking the quiet, "what's your plan now?" I sighed. I didn't have a plan. Not really. I don't know. I can't stay with Candy, that's for sure. But I can't walk away from the boys either. I just feel stuck. Charlie nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "You need time, Jeff. Don't rush into anything. You've been through a lot, and it's okay to not have everything figured out right now." "I feel like I'm failing them," I admitted, my voice cracking. I mean, they're not even mine, but I've been their dad from day one. How do I walk away from that? You don't have to, Charlie said softly. You can still be in their lives. You love them, and they love you. That doesn't change just because of what Candy did. I knew she was right, but it didn't make the situation any easier. The boys were my world, and even though they weren't mine by blood, I couldn't imagine not being their dad. But staying in that house with Candy, that wasn't an option anymore. I think I'm gonna stay here for a while, I finally said, glancing at Charlie. If that's okay with you. Charlie didn't hesitate. Of course it's okay. Stay as long as you need, Jeff. And just like that, I had a place to breathe, to think, to figure things out without Candy hovering over me. But it didn't change the fact that everything felt like a mess. As the days went on, I stayed at Charlie's. I saw the boys, of course. I wasn't about to disappear from their lives. I'd go over to the house when Candy was at work, spend time with them, make sure they knew I wasn't going anywhere, at least not from them. But being around Candy was unbearable. Every time I saw her, all I could think about were the lies, the betrayal. She didn't make things any easier either. Whenever we did talk, it was cold, distant. She'd throw jabs at me, accusing me of abandoning her, of not being a real man, of leaving her to raise the kids alone. It was like she didn't even care about what she'd done, just cared about the fact that I wasn't there to clean up the mess anymore. Meanwhile, things between Charlie and me got more complicated. She was always there, supporting me, being that constant in my life. But the more time we spent together, the more I started to see her in a different light. She wasn't just my best friend anymore. And I couldn't ignore the way she looked at me, or the way I started feeling when I was around her. One night, after a long day, we were sitting on her porch, drinking a couple of beers like we used to. The air was cool, and everything was quiet, just the two of us. I don't know why, but I found myself staring at her, the way the moonlight hit her face, the way she smiled at me like she always had. I don't know what I'd do without you, Charlie, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She glanced at me, her eyes softer than usual. You don't have to do it alone, Jeff. I'm here. I've always been here. Something about the way she said it, the way her voice wavered, hit me hard. I knew what she meant. I knew what had been simmering between us, even if we hadn't admitted it yet. I swallowed hard, not sure what to do with the weight of everything I was feeling. Charlie, Before I could finish, she reached out, resting her hand on mine. It wasn't the first time she'd done that, but this time it felt different. I looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly, it all came crashing down. All those years of being friends, of ignoring the feelings that had always been there, buried beneath everything else, it all came flooding back. I didn't know if it was right, but I knew I couldn't hold it in anymore. Without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her. The moment I kissed Charlie, everything else faded away. All the noise, all the confusion, it just disappeared. It was just me and her, and for the first time in a long time, something felt right. She kissed me back, soft at first, like she wasn't sure if this was really happening. But then, her grip on my hand tightened, and it deepened. All the years of friendship, of unspoken feelings, of everything that had been building between us, it all came out in that one moment. But then, just as quickly, Charlie pulled away, her breathing shaky. She looked at me, her eyes full of emotions I couldn't quite read, hope, fear, maybe even guilt. Jeff, she started, but her voice trailed off. I ran a hand through my hair, my heart pounding. I'm sorry, Charlie. I shouldn't have. No, she interrupted, shaking her head. It's not that. It's just, I don't want to be a part of more chaos in your life. You're going through so much right now, and I don't want to make things worse. Her words hit me hard because I knew she was right. My life was a mess, and here I was, adding another layer of complication to it. But at the same time, I couldn't deny what I felt, and I was pretty sure she couldn't either. I know, I said quietly, trying to gather my thoughts. But Charlie, this isn't just about now. It's not just because of what's happening with Candy. This is something I've been ignoring for a long time. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, trying to figure out what I was saying. What do you mean? I mean, I think I've been in love with you for years, I admitted, the words heavy but honest. I just never let myself see it because I was too caught up in everything else. But I see it now, and I don't want to keep pretending like it's not there. Charlie blinked, and for a second, she didn't say anything. She just sat there, processing what I'd said. Then she let out a breath she'd been holding. "Jeff, you have no idea how long I've waited to hear you say that." I felt a weight lift off my chest, but there was still the reality of everything hanging between us. "So where does that leave us?" I asked, unsure of what came next. She looked away for a second, like she was trying to figure it out herself. "I don't know," she admitted. "I want this, Jeff. I've always wanted this. But your life is complicated right now. You're still dealing with Candy, the boys, everything. I don't want to be something you run to just because things are falling apart." Her words were careful, but they were true. And that's what I loved about Charlie. She always kept me grounded, even when I didn't want to hear it. "I get that," I said softly. "And I don't want to rush into anything, not until I figure things out. But I also don't want to pretend like this doesn't mean something. Because it does. To me, it really does." Charlie nodded, her hand still resting on mine. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Promise me you won't lose yourself in all of this. Don't let what happened with Candy break you. Because I know who you are, Jeff. And you're a good man. A good dad. Don't forget that." I felt my throat tighten at her words. She believed in me more than I believed in myself right now. But hearing it from her, it gave me some strength I didn't know I had left. "I promise," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We sat there in the quiet after that, neither of us moving to take things further, neither of us pulling away either. It was like we both knew there was something between us now, but we had to give it space, let it grow naturally instead of rushing into it. Eventually we said goodnight, and I went back inside, but things were different now. I could feel it. There was still so much to figure out, with Candy, with the boys, with everything. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something better. And Charlie? She was a part of that hope. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Candy. She wanted to talk. I stared at Candy's message for a long time, unsure if I was ready for whatever she had to say. After everything that happened, I didn't know how I was supposed to face her. But I couldn't avoid it forever. She wanted to meet, to talk about the boys and the future, as she put it. I didn't know what she was playing at, but I agreed to meet her later that day at the house. Part of me dreaded it, but the other part knew I needed to confront this head-on. I needed to figure out how to move forward, not just for me, but for the twins too. When I arrived at the house, it felt weird stepping inside. It didn't feel like home anymore. Candy was sitting at the kitchen table, looking calmer than I expected. I walked in, sat across from her, and waited for her to speak. "So," she started, folding her arms across her chest, "I guess we're at the point where we need to figure out what happens next." Her tone was cold, but not surprising. Candy had always been like that, hard guarded. It was part of why I fell for her in the first place. She had this way of being untouchable, and I guess I liked the challenge. But now, sitting across from her after everything, that wall she kept up just made me feel more distant from her than ever. "I'm not staying here, Candy," I said, getting straight to the point. "I can't. Not after what you did." She rolled her eyes like she was already tired of hearing it. "Jeff, we've been over this. What I did was wrong, sure. But what's done is done. You're still the twins' father, whether they're yours biologically or not." That last part stung. She said it so casually, like it didn't matter. But to me, it mattered. It mattered a lot. "They are my kids," I said, my voice firm. "I've been their dad from day one, and I'll always be there for them. But I can't pretend like this marriage is going to work. You lied to me for years, Candy." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "So what? You're just going to leave and we'll what, co-parent? Like that's going to be easy." "I don't know what it's going to be like," I admitted. "But I can't stay with you. I deserve more than that, and the boys deserve to grow up in a house where things aren't so broken." Candy narrowed her eyes. "Oh, so now you're the victim, huh? You're just going to leave me to raise them alone." I shook my head, trying to stay calm. "I'm not leaving them. I'll be there every step of the way. But I can't be with you. That's over, Candy." She was silent for a minute, probably processing the fact that I wasn't backing down. Finally, she leaned forward and said, "Fine. You want a divorce? Go ahead. But don't think for a second that I'm going to make this easy for you. You want to see the boys? We'll do it on my terms." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I should have seen it coming, but hearing her say it still shook me. You can't keep them from me, Candy, I said, my voice rising. I'll fight for them if I have to. She gave me a cold smile. Good luck with that. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep it together. The thought of her using the twins as leverage made me sick. But this was Candy. She'd always been about control, and now with the marriage falling apart, she was trying to cling to the one thing she still had power over, the boys. We didn't say much after that. I left the house feeling worse than I did when I walked in. She wasn't going to make this easy, and deep down, I knew the fight for the kids was just beginning. But as I drove back to Charlie's, I kept thinking about what she said. That I wasn't going to make things easy for myself either. I knew she was right about one thing. This wasn't going to be a clean break. There was too much history, too much hurt. When I got back to Charlie's place, she was sitting on the porch, waiting for me. She could tell by the look on my face that the conversation with Candy hadn't gone well. How did it go? She asked, concern in her eyes. I sat down next to her and let out a long breath. It's a mess, Charlie. She's already threatening to make things hard with the kids. Charlie didn't say anything for a minute, just sat there quietly, letting me vent. Then she reached out and put her hand on my shoulder. You'll get through this, Jeff. We'll figure it out. There was that word again. We. I looked at her, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear because I knew things with Candy were about to get ugly, but relief because I wasn't alone. Charlie had my back, like she always did. I don't know what I'd do without you, I admitted. Charlie smiled, that same sad, understanding smile. You're not going to find out, she said softly. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. The next few days were a blur of emotions, paperwork, and trying to wrap my head around the mess my life had become. Candy wasn't bluffing. She'd already started talking to lawyers about the divorce, about custody, and making it clear she was going to fight dirty if she had to. It was exhausting, and I felt like I was drowning in it all. But every night, I came back to Charlie's place, and she kept me steady. One evening, after a particularly rough day dealing with Candy's constant threats, I was sitting on Charlie's porch again, staring into the distance, wondering how I was going to get through this. Charlie sat beside me like always, her quiet presence enough to calm me down a bit. Jeff, I've been thinking, she said, breaking the silence. You need to make sure you get a good lawyer. Someone who knows how to handle this kind of situation. Candy's going to make this a fight, and you need to be prepared. I sighed. Yeah, I know. I never wanted it to get this far, you know? I thought if we split, it would be civil for the kids' sake. But she's not letting it be that way. Charlie nodded, her expression serious. I know it's hard, but you need to focus on the boys. They need you, Jeff, and you're their dad in every way that matters. Don't let Candy manipulate you into thinking otherwise. Her words hit me hard because that was exactly what Candy had been trying to do. She was using the boys, twisting everything to make me feel like the bad guy. Like I was the one abandoning them, when really, all I wanted was to be a good dad without staying trapped in a toxic marriage. I'll get the lawyer, I said, nodding. I can't let her take them from me. Charlie smiled softly, her eyes full of that quiet determination she always had. Good. You deserve to fight for your happiness, Jeff. Don't forget that. Later that night, after I made a few calls and set up a meeting with a lawyer, I sat down with Charlie again. We were watching TV, but my mind kept drifting to her, to us, and to that kiss we shared a few nights ago. It hadn't been mentioned since, like we both knew we had to give it space. But the tension between us had grown. Every time I looked at her, I could feel it, the unspoken thing that had been between us for years, now sitting out in the open, waiting for one of us to deal with it. I turned to her, my heart pounding, and decided it was time to talk about it. Charlie, about the other night. She looked at me, her expression cautious but curious. Yeah. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. About us. About what it means. Charlie shifted in her seat, her eyes meeting mine with a seriousness I wasn't used to seeing in her. Me either, she admitted. But I'm scared, Jeff. I'm scared this is all just happening because of what's going on with Candy. I don't want to be the person you run to just because your marriage is falling apart. Her words hit me deep because that was the last thing I wanted her to feel. It's not just about that, Charlie. I've been blind to a lot of things, but I see it now. I've always cared about you, more than I ever realized. And I'm not saying I've got it all figured out, because I don't. But I know this. What I feel for you is real. Charlie looked down, biting her lip like she was trying to process what I was saying. I've always felt it too, she finally said, her voice soft. But I never wanted to get in the way. I didn't want to ruin what we had, or complicate things even more. You're not complicating things, I said, my voice firm. You're the only thing that makes sense right now. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with emotion, and I could see how much she had been holding back, how long she'd been waiting for this moment. I reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine. I don't want to rush anything, Charlie. But I also don't want to ignore this. Whatever this is between us, it's real. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, just squeezed my hand. Then she smiled, that same soft, knowing smile that always made me feel like things might just be okay. We'll take it slow, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I want this too, Jeff. Hearing those words was like a weight lifting off my chest. We weren't diving headfirst into something without thinking. We were giving it the time and space it needed. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. As the days passed, I started to see a light at the end of the tunnel. There were still meetings with the lawyer, still tense conversations with Candy about the boys, but there was also hope now, hope that I could rebuild, that I could move forward. And through it all, Charlie was there, just like she always had been. But now, things between us were different. We were taking it slow, like we promised, but there was no denying the connection between us anymore. I didn't know what the future held with Candy or the boys, but one thing was certain, Charlie was part of that future. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to admit that. Then, just when things started to feel like they were settling down, Candy dropped another bombshell. She wasn't going to fight for custody. When Candy told me she wasn't going to fight for custody, I honestly didn't know what to say. I stood there in disbelief, waiting for the catch, the twist. There had to be one, right? This was Candy. She never just gave up control. She sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed, looking more tired than I'd ever seen her. It wasn't her usual confident, manipulative self. This was different. I've been thinking, she started, her voice quieter than usual. The boys deserve stability, and I'm not. I'm not in a place to give them that right now. I blinked, not sure if I should feel relief or suspicion. What are you saying, Candy? She sighed, looking down at her hands. I'll let you have primary custody. I'll still see them, obviously, but they need to be with someone who can give them more than I can right now. Part of me wanted to believe this was a genuine change, that she was finally thinking about what was best for the kids. But another part of me couldn't help but wonder what she was up to. This was a woman who had lied to me for years, who had no problem manipulating people to get what she wanted. Why the change of heart? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Candy glanced at me, her expression unreadable. I've been thinking about everything. About the boys, about us. And maybe I wasn't the best mom or wife, but I don't want to make things worse by dragging this out. I know you love them, and I know you'll take care of them. It almost sounded like an apology, but not quite. Still, it was more than I expected from her. So you're just giving up? I asked, still not sure if I could trust what I was hearing. She shrugged. Call it what you want. I'm not giving up. I'm just doing what's best for the boys. That's all that matters now. I stood there, staring at her, feeling a mix of emotions. Relief, confusion, maybe even a bit of sadness. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that remembered the good times, back when I thought our marriage was real. But those days were gone, and there was no going back. All right, I finally said, nodding. If that's what you want, we'll figure it out. But I'm not going to let you disappear from their lives. Candy looked at me, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I'm not disappearing, Jeff. I'm just stepping back. You'll be the one raising them day to day. And I think that's for the best. I didn't know how to feel, but I accepted it. I had no choice but to accept it. Candy was actually letting me take the lead, and after all the fighting, all the manipulation, I didn't expect that. But maybe, just maybe, she realized that this wasn't about us anymore, it was about the boys. I left her house that day feeling lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. It wasn't a perfect situation, but it was something. I wasn't going to have to fight her tooth and nail for custody, and that meant I could focus on being the best dad I could be for the boys. When I got back to Charlie's, she could tell right away that something had changed. You look different, she said as I walked in, her eyes studying me carefully. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Candy's not going to fight for custody. Charlie blinked, clearly surprised. Wait, what? She's just giving you the kids. Pretty much, I said, sitting down across from her. She says she's not in a place to give them what they need, and she's not going to drag this out. Charlie's face softened, and she reached out to touch my arm. That's good, right? Yeah, I said, though I was still processing it. It's good. I didn't expect it. I thought this was going to be a battle. Charlie smiled gently. Maybe she's finally realizing what's best for the boys. You're the one they need, Jeff. And now, you don't have to worry about losing them. Hearing her say that made it feel more real. For the first time, I could actually picture a future where I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Candy to tear everything apart. I could just focus on being their dad, on raising them the way they deserved. But then, a new thought crept into my mind. If Candy was stepping back, what was next for me? For us? Charlie must have sensed my shift in mood because she tilted her head, her eyes softening. What's going on in that head of yours? I smiled, shaking my head. Just thinking about the future, I guess. She raised an eyebrow. And I want you to be part of it, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Charlie blinked, clearly caught off guard, but she didn't look away. Jeff. I know we said we'd take it slow, I continued, but now that this is happening with Candy, I want you to know that I'm serious. About us. About whatever this is. She smiled softly, her eyes searching mine. I'm serious about it too, she said quietly. But we still have to be careful. This is a lot of change, and we don't want to rush things. I know, I said, taking her hand in mine. I'm not trying to rush. I just want you to know that I see a future with you in it. Charlie's smile grew, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We didn't have all the answers yet, and I knew there was still a lot to figure out. But with Candy stepping back and Charlie by my side, I finally felt like I was moving forward. Like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. As I sat there with Charlie, I realized that the life I thought I had with Candy was over. But maybe, just maybe, something better was waiting for me ahead. And this time, I wasn't afraid to take that step forward. A few days later, the reality of what Candy had said started to sink in. She wasn't going to fight for custody, and I was going to be the boy's primary parent. It was overwhelming, but also a relief. Finally, I could focus on being a dad without the constant drama hanging over my head. Charlie and I kept things steady, just like we promised. We didn't push too hard, but there was no denying the shift in our relationship. We were closer now, more connected, and it felt good, natural, even. She was always there, helping me get things in order for the boys, giving me advice, and just being that solid presence I needed. One evening, after spending the day running errands for the twins, Charlie and I sat on her porch, watching the sunset. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like everything was crashing down around me. Looks like things are finally settling down, Charlie said, her voice calm, but there was something in her eyes, something deeper. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Yeah. I think I'm finally starting to get the hang of it all. We sat there for a moment, just taking it all in, before Charlie spoke again. You know, Jeff, you've been doing an amazing job with the boys. They're lucky to have you. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. I couldn't have done it without you, Charlie. You've been here for me through all of it. She blushed slightly, looking away for a second. I just did what any friend would do. But we both knew it was more than that now. Without thinking too much, I reached out and took her hand. Charlie, you're more than just a friend to me. You always have been. She looked at me, her eyes softening, and for a second I could see the future, the one I wanted, the one that made sense. I know, she whispered, squeezing my hand. We didn't need to say anything more. We weren't rushing, but we also weren't pretending anymore. We both knew what was happening between us, and we were finally letting it unfold, slowly but surely. As we sat there, the world felt a little less chaotic, a little more like it was supposed to be. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't dreading what was coming next. I was ready for it. A week later, I was officially settling into my new life as the boys' primary parent. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Every day I got a little better at juggling everything, work, the kids, and figuring out how to move forward. Charlie was there through it all, always helping when she could, but we were still taking things slow, just like we promised. There was no rush. It felt good knowing we were on the same page. One afternoon, after the boys had gone down for their nap, Charlie and I sat in the living room, quietly enjoying the calm. I looked at her, feeling that familiar warmth in my chest. It was something I couldn't ignore anymore. "You know," I said softly, "I think I'm finally starting to see what my life's supposed to look like." Charlie smiled, meeting my eyes. "Yeah. Yeah," I nodded. "And you're in it." Her smile grew, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Good. Because I plan on being here." And just like that, things felt complete. We weren't in a hurry, but we both knew where we were headed. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough.